Now, if we are looking at the faint fingerprints and traces of a lost civilization that explored and mapped the world more than 13,000 years ago, what other traces are there? Well, I wrote a whole book about this called Fingerprints of the Gods, so you'll find it all in there. But I want to concentrate on the spiritual side of things, because there is an astonishing spiritual continuity all around the world. And I'm going to speak of it today with specific focus to ancient Egypt, but also with a secondary focus on Cambodia. Again, the Piri-Reis map. It actually turns out to be drawn on a very modern projection, which is an azimuthal equidistant projection, and it's based on Cairo, where Giza is, where the pyramids of Giza are. So this seems a good opportunity to go to Giza. And here we find the majestic, the incredible, the mysterious Great Sphinx, speaking to us in riddles down the ages, this beautiful and majestic monument, and the pyramids themselves. My wife Santha took all of these photographs. She and I have been privileged to visit Egypt times beyond counting. There is something truly magical and mysterious about that site. It is a very special place on the world. It isn't the only special place, but it is extraordinarily special, and it touches the soul, and it touches something deep in us, and I believe that that's because it was designed to do that. The three great pyramids of Giza standing there in the desert like three stars brought down to earth. Now, one thing about the Great Pyramid you can tell immediately, even though you might not know anything else, is that astronomy was involved in creating it. The Great Pyramid is stunningly accurately aligned to true north, south, east, and west. It's actually within 3/60ths of a single degree of true north, and that is an incredible accurate alignment, especially when you're dealing with a monument with a footprint of 13 acres. It would be very hard to do it today. We probably could do it, but it would be difficult. And the architect would want to know why. I mean, why do you want to do that? We can build you this amazing, huge monument, but must it really be within 3/60ths of a single degree of true north? That's making the problem really, really huge. So it tells us not only were astronomers involved to get that level of accuracy, but also that it was important to them. It really mattered to them to be precise, to be on the button in that way. And a second thing which just will not go away at Giza, no matter how angry the archaeologists become, no matter how they swarm out of their nest and leap all over anybody who dares to criticize the existing paradigm. What will not go away is the hint of much greater antiquity surrounding the entire Giza complex. That's what won't go away. And that's what I want to look into a little bit just now. This is from the Temple of Seti I in Abydos, and we see the pharaoh Seti showing his young son, Ramesses II, a list of all the kings of Egypt who'd ruled before them. And that list goes back through the historical pharaohs who we know about, back to round about the date that we would call 3000 BC, when Egyptian civilization is supposed to have begun, but it doesn't stop there. It keeps on going back. It goes back thousands and thousands and thousands of years before that, until the time of the gods, the time that the ancient Egyptians called Zep Tepi, the first time, when the gods brought civilization to Egypt. That's what the pharaoh is showing his son, a connection to the gods, going back thousands of years into the past. And from the tomb of Seti I, again, we see this idea that goes right the way back to the god Osiris. here showing the way to the future Horus kings of Egypt, how they should live, how they should create a kingdom, how it should be in harmony between earth and heaven. Everything goes back to the first time, to the time of the gods, to the time of Osiris. Temple of Horus at Edfu. Horus is the son of Osiris in the traditions of the ancient Egyptians. At this temple of Horus, there are whole walls covered with texts. And those texts are known as the Edfu building texts. This is what they look like. And they're very mysterious. Many people, many archaeologists will tell you that there is no flood tradition in Egypt. This is absolute nonsense. They clearly have not read the Edfu building texts, because the Edfu building texts speak of a homeland of the primeval ones. They say it was an island. They say it's where the gods lived. They say there was a great flood there, which utterly destroyed it. And that those gods who survived came to Egypt, settled in Egypt, and started to re-establish what they had had before. They built what were called primeval mounds all over Egypt, which were to be the sites of all future temples and religious structures in Egypt. Is it possible that some of the monuments of ancient Egypt are actually much older than the Egyptologists tell us? Here's the Osirion in Abydos, named after the god Osiris. And it's a very curious structure, gigantic blocks of stone. 100-ton weights are very common in the Osirion. And weirdly, it's close to 100 feet lower than the nearby temple of Seti I. Now, Egyptologists attribute this monument to Seti I. But it actually appears to have been built at a much earlier phase. It's just so much lower down. It's like there's been an accumulation of silt on top of it, and then thousands of years later, Seti I came along and built his temple. And then when the archaeologists excavated it, they said, well, that's by Seti I. This is nearby. It must be by Seti I. There's no good evidence connecting it to Seti I at all. The Great Sphinx of Giza. I'm not going to go into detail into Robert Schoch's and John Anthony West's extraordinary work on the rainfall erosion of the Sphinx, but it has thrown a real spanner in the works of Egyptology, and the Egyptologists are still very upset about it. You know, how dare a geologist suggest that the Sphinx actually might be thousands of years older than it's supposed to be, because that is what Schoch and West are suggesting, that these erosion patterns in the trench surrounding the Sphinx, which we would have seen on the body of the Sphinx too if it had not been restored again and again down the ages, that this erosion pattern can only be caused by exposure to thousands of years of heavy, heavy rainfall. And no such rainfall fell in Egypt in 2500 BC when the Sphinx is supposed to have been built. You have to go back to the end of the last ice age to find that massive precipitation that could have caused this level of weathering in Egypt. And these extraordinary temples that stand in front of the Sphinx were created from the limestone that was quarried out around the body of the Sphinx to create the body. Therefore, they are as old as the Sphinx. If the Sphinx is 12,000 years old, then so are these temples. And these temples, like mighty memorials of a forgotten past, are really hard to explain. There are blocks of stone, again, in the range of 100 tons in these temples, and they just have been built up as though it's an easy thing to do, as though it's easy to manipulate 100-ton blocks of stone. Now, the three Great Pyramids standing above the modern city of Cairo. That atmosphere of strangeness and mystery cannot be escaped. Let's take a quick flight around the Great Pyramids of Giza. We're looking from the east side here over the village of Nazlet al-Saman, the Great Pyramid, Pyramid of Khafre, supposedly the Pyramid of Menkaure. We'll come around again. swinging around to the west side now. This is the north face of the Great Pyramid, the second pyramid, the third pyramid. Can you see the Sphinx, by the way? This is the Sphinx down here. The Sphinx is 270 feet long and 80 feet high, but it's dwarfed by the pyramids. It almost disappears from view. And here's the Valley of the Nile off to the east. So let's just come in closer and closer to these amazing monuments. The top of the Great Pyramid, 480 feet above the ground, a flattened area on top of the Great Pyramid there. And there I am, on top of the Great Pyramid. Now, I'm not showing this picture for, well, that's how I used to look in those days. Ah, sweet bird of youth. How quickly does she fly? We climbed up the southwest face there, the southwest corner. And actually, I've climbed the Great Pyramid 5 times. 3 of the climbs were legal, and 2 were illegal. This was one of the illegal climbs. And on one of the climbs, when I had more time, because I was up there legally and the police weren't going to arrest me, Santa and I, we spent some time looking around at the graffiti on top of the Great Pyramid. It's astonishing. There's graffiti going back hundreds of years up there. Even Mercator, that map maker, he left his graffiti up there. Loads of people have been climbing the Great Pyramid and leaving their graffiti. Including, I found, and this was an astonishing moment for me, one step down, just behind me there, is a piece of graffiti that says, P. Hancock, April 5th, 1916. My grandfather was called Philip Hancock. He was in Egypt in 1916. After we got down off the pyramid, I called my dad, he was still alive then, and asked him to look at my grandfather's diary. What did he say for the date of April 5th, 1916? One single line: climbed the Great Pyramid today. It was an extraordinary moment for me. And there's something about this place. It's like flying on a magic carpet above the city of Cairo. It's such a privilege, such a gift to be able to go there. I don't want to bore you with statistics. It's just 13.1 acres. It weighs 6 million tons. It's got 2.3 million blocks of stone. It's 481 feet high. It just is the most amazing thing. You know, it's just, you can look at it and just kind of miss it, and then you look at it closely and you begin to realize you're looking at something that's utterly impossible. I just want to take you on a quick journey around some of the interior of the Great Pyramid. I think we'll start down here in the so-called subterranean chamber, which is 600 feet vertically beneath the apex of the pyramid and about 100 feet beneath the base. It's carved out of solid rock. They went 300 feet, a sloped corridor, sloping at an angle of 26 degrees. You have to go 300 feet down it, and then you reach this chamber at the bottom. So they had to make that chamber. They had to cut down through the rock 300 feet. It's about 3 feet 6 inches high and the same wide. So you have got to go down like this all the way down. And you get to the bottom, and here's this rock-hewn chamber, deep underground. And here's a couple of likely lads in the rock-hewn chamber. That's me and my friend Robert Boval, the author of the Orion Mystery, just to give you a sense of the size of the room. Now, coming out of the subterranean chamber, let's go back up this passageway which leads to it. There it is, cut from solid rock, as I described. And then you come to this junction here, and you go up the so-called ascending corridor and along a horizontal passage that leads you to the so-called Queen's Chamber. We don't know what the builders of these pyramids called these chambers. All these names are modern attributions. Let's just take a quick look inside the Queen's Chamber. The statistics are there. There's these curious little shafts in the walls of the Queen's Chamber. Up until the 1870s, this shaft was not visible. It was covered by a block of stone. When they completed the chamber, they closed it. But a British Freemason called Wayman Dixon, who'd noticed that there were shafts in the chamber above, the King's Chamber, wondered if there might be shafts in the Queen's Chamber, and he went around tapping the walls. And he found these hollow points, cut out the stone, and sure enough, there's these shafts. And my friend Robert Boval has established the astronomical connections of these shafts. That the Queen's Chamber shafts point, the southern shaft, this one, points to Sirius, and the northern shaft points to Beta Ursa Minor. Very curious thing, especially since these shafts actually do not exit on the outside of the pyramid. The ones from the King's Chamber do, but these ones don't. And back in 1993, a German robotics engineer, Rudolf Gantenbrink, sent a little robot up that shaft, and 165 feet up the shaft, the robot came to this door with two metal handles. Rudolf Gantenbrink was immediately banned from doing any further work in Egypt and was sent away. The project was taken over by the Egyptian government. Some years later, Zahi Hawass sent another robot up the shaft with a mission to drill through that door and find out what was on the other side. And there we go, there's the drill, there's the door, there's the hole that they made. You know what they found on the other side? A space and another door. It's like an invitation. Search me. The pyramid is saying, search me, but I'm not going to make it easy for you. You're really going to have to figure this thing out. We still don't know what's at the end of that shaft. Okay, so we're going to come out of the Queen's Chamber, back along the horizontal corridor. Now we're looking at the Grand Gallery, 153 feet long, 28 feet high. This is called a corbel vault. Each level protrudes slightly over the level below it and narrows up towards the ceiling. Well, these blocks weigh about 70 tons each. They're laid at an angle of 26 degrees. You can't get a sheet of paper between the joints. They're unbelievably precise. It's like being compared to opticians' work on a scale of acres. An astonishing feat of construction. The work of giants, really. At the top of the Grand Gallery, you have an entrance to the King's Chamber. This is the King's Chamber here. And above the King's Chamber, not known until the early 19th century, are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more chambers. And getting into those chambers is really fun. I'll come to that in a moment. But let's first of all go into the King's Chamber. And this is what the King's Chamber looks like. Those are those shafts again. This is the northern shaft, the southern shaft's on this side. One pointing to Orion's belt, and the other again pointing to one of the circumpolar stars. It's a beautiful geometric room. It's made of granite blocks. The Great Pyramid is a limestone monument. These granite blocks were brought about 500 miles from Aswan. They were lifted to a height of hundreds of feet above the ground and put into position in this extraordinary chamber in the heart of the pyramid. There is a sarcophagus in it. I and my colleagues believe that this is not a sarcophagus that ever contained the body of the pharaoh Khufu, or of any pharaoh. We think that it was involved in some kind of process, some kind of initiation. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. But because there is a sarcophagus in it, immediately the assumption has been made that this must have been the burial chamber of Khufu. Let's look at this setup again here. The King's Chamber and the so-called relieving chambers up above it, rather similar to the Jed pillar, the symbolic backbone of Osiris, which is a symbol of resurrection and rebirth in the ancient Egyptian religion. It seems that they were creating a symbol of resurrection, of rebirth within the Great Pyramid. To get into those rooms, here's what you do. You put a ladder 30 feet high up against this wall, and you lean it up against that side there, and there's a little hole just a bit wider than me, which fortunately a rope now hangs out of, and you grab hold of that rope, haul your body into it, pull yourself through, and then you get into a narrow tunnel, and that leads you into the first and eventually into all 5 of these chambers. And I'll just take you to the top chamber. That's that one up there. And again, these extraordinary, huge blocks of stone. These are in the range of 100 tons each, which form the floor of this chamber, and indeed all the other chambers, again, have these gigantic blocks of stone, which are almost impossible to move, really, but there they are. More graffiti inside. Sister M.T. Martin, 6th of February 1915. There's me with one of my kids, Layla. Again, just to show you the size and the scale of the thing. We'll go back to the pyramids. Here is the only evidence that Egyptologists are able to cite which connects the Great Pyramid to the pharaoh Khufu. And that is a cartouche which appears to say the name Khufu, that is found in that very topmost relieving chamber that I showed you. It's round about over here somewhere. And there are no other inscriptions whatsoever inside the Great Pyramid, not one. But this graffiti, as it's referred to, is supposed to be what's called a quarry mark that was put on the blocks by the gangs of construction workers who were quarrying out the blocks that would be built into the Great Pyramid. And they said, this is Khufu's block, or something like that. It's not very convincing evidence that the pyramid was built by Khufu or for Khufu. There is a hint of doubt over the authenticity of the cartouche itself. Could it have been forged by Howard Weiss, who found it in the early 19th century? But one thing's for sure, if Khufu was the builder of the pyramid, he had a pretty small ego for such a big monument. This is the only statue of Khufu that's ever survived. It's about 2 inches high. And, you know, you would have thought he'd have put his name all over this thing instead of just on some bit of graffiti up in a block in a chamber that nobody's ever going to see. But he didn't. It's absolutely bare. There are no texts, nothing in there that tells you what's going on. However, if you go down to Saqqara, about 15 miles south of Giza, you will come to a group of pyramids dating from the 5th and 6th dynasties, not the 4th dynasty, which this one supposedly dates to. And those pyramids are filled with text. Now, I'm just showing this overlay. Actually, I'm going to give away Santa's secret. She did this by accident. Because we were at Giza. Santa took a shot of the pyramids of Giza. Then we went down to Saqqara, and we went into the pyramid of Unas. And Santa took a photograph of the pyramid of Unas, and we got this double exposure, where the pyramid of Unas is overlaid on the Giza pyramids. And here are the so-called pyramid texts, the star-covered ceiling of the pyramid of Unas, and the pyramid texts on the walls. And these pyramid texts are the earliest surviving recensions of what we now know as the Books of the Dead, the ancient Egyptian Books of the Dead. And they concern the mystery of life and death and what it is we're doing on this planet. They're very deep, they're very profound. And they are, it seems to me that they were putting in writing there what the Great Pyramid does in architecture alone. The Great Pyramid does it entirely symbolically in architecture. In the later pyramids, they expressed it in texts. And all of these texts, whether it's the pyramid texts, which are the oldest surviving, the coffin texts, because they're written inside the lids of coffins, the book of what is in the Duat, which you'll find painted on the walls of many of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings, and the Books of the Dead, which were papyrus scrolls that were placed with the deceased inside the coffin. All of these seek to prepare us for the journey that the ancient Egyptians believed that we will face, that we will confront on our own deaths.